Hi, Wilty here. I wanted to do a video on the 4v4 Sundaes that happened yesterday. Because, for one, it actually has overhead for once. I'll link this VOD in the description if you haven't seen it and are watching this video and want to see the full thing. But unlike most actual good tournaments, they actually had overhead for some of it. And they switched over to the auto spectate because that's what most people watching wanted, but there's at least some gameplay with the overhead that I wanted to go over. And I'm still going to talk about the sets that were shown in Spectator. I just can't go as in-depth with it. Though I'm not sure how in-depth I'll actually go, since a lot of the issues with this set are sort of the same issue coming up multiple times. So I'm just going to get into it. So the main issue I found with Good Morning as a team is that Keen and Soldier really don't feel like they're playing off Omega. Because Omega's doing a lot right, but it just really felt like Keen and Soldier weren't really sure how to work off of what Omega was doing. And a lot of time, the team felt very disconnected. We had Soldier and Keen kind of playing it back, Lux playing it back because Lux didn't really have any good ways to play off of Soldier and Keen, which he normally would want to be doing, and Omega's just kind of off on his own. And it often seems like Omega's like making these bad plays because he's off on his own, because he's actually doing the right thing. It's just the rest of the team isn't capitalizing on it. Whereas Rose, I'm not going to have much to talk about, so I think they mostly just did a good job, and since they're the ones that won, it's kind of hard to say too much about them. So I'm mostly going to be focusing on Good Morning. And another thing, you see the Good Morning's really just like sitting back and giving free control mid, which isn't really ideal because they get pop. Usually getting pop gives you control of mid, but then they just all back up. And I'm honestly not even sure what's going on here. They just go all the way back here and just give up free control. So I guess they just don't want to even take fights, but by not contesting mid, they just give Rose a free opening push, even though they're the ones getting pop. And you see Omega go for like this kind of flanky side play a little bit to try to like disrupt them, but the rest of them are like way back here. And Soldier goes in, Omega kind of comes back. That was actually a good play, like Omega coming back, Soldier pushing in. If they timed it a little bit better, it would have been like, they could have actually like pincered. Like that's the kind of thing that the team should be doing, where Omega's kind of like up here, and then Soldier and Keen are like pushing towards Omega, and then like taking different angles on the same fights. But here you see like Lux is using Inkjet, Omega's pushing in with Hammer, and Keen and Soldier are just like sitting here, not doing anything. While two of the teammates are actually like taking a fight using specials. Again, this feels like it's the issue, that the main issue is these two just aren't really taking fights with Omega and like capitalizing on what Omega does. And here it's just kind of like, it's their push is already kind of dead at that point. They're just trying to get as many points as possible. But you see on the other team, OVI goes in for like a solo play, but he still stays close enough that his teammates can now like crossfire to him and assist with him. With Omega, a lot of the time he's going in, and the rest of the team is just not following him in. He's kind of just stuck on his own. And here, this is actually a pretty good moment for Lux, where like Omega's like dealing with the flank. He dies, but Lux gets the trade off of him. So this is perfectly fine. They lose Omega, but they deal with the flank. But the problem is that Keen and Soldier are committing in while Lux is off, like helping with the flank. They're just kind of like running in on their own when they should be like stalling. Because that wasn't actually a good situation for them to push into. They really needed to just stall and wait for the rest of their team to get in and help actually end the push. And because they committed in and both died, it was just Lux up, and Lux isn't going to stop that push on his own. Yeah, here, they just left Lux on his own, and he's not going to stop 3 people, even if one's the Rainmaker. And once the 3 respawn, they do like stop the Rainmaker, but if Keen and Soldier hadn't committed in earlier, they could have stopped the Rainmaker sooner. Because then they'd just be waiting on Lux to come back from that flank earlier, from dealing with that flank earlier, and they'd be waiting for Omega to respawn. Here's fine, nothing's really happening. They're just kind of like poking, painting for specials, reading the situation. Omega pushes in. Keen actually does kind of start following him, but Omega backs up and Keen backs up. Again, not too much to say about this point in time because nothing's really happening. The main issue I'm seeing is when there's actually a push, and then that one defense was awkward. But mostly the issue this team's having is during pushes. But here you can see, again, like, Soldier's just kind of like off on his own. Like, I get he's checking the flank, but his teammates are actually taking a fight here. And Lux and Omega really want Soldier to be there to help with this fight. So, yeah, I'm just letting it play out, but the main issue really is just Soldier and King need to be taking fights with Omega. I'll probably just skip around at this point since I don't know if there's much more I can say. Do they get another push here? Yeah, Omega gets a good play here. And Soldier's actually like coming with him, which is good. Like that was good. And they actually get a good push off of it. It's not good enough to win because they screwed up the defense earlier. And that's still not an amazing push, but again, like Omega gets the opening pick, Soldier actually like pushes in and plays off of Omega. And Lux is there using Jet. Like that's the first time this game where I really felt like the team's actually functioning the way it should. And the push still falls apart, but like you can see Omega and Soldier actually like fighting together and working together as a pair. And then Soldier backs up when it falls out. Or when the play stops working, Soldier backs out, but he still stays relevant. They manage to keep control of this area. Like at this point in the game, the team's actually like playing well. It's just too late to really matter. So most of the other games, you're just going to see the same issue. I'm not sure how much I'll actually focus on it, and I might just skip around. Like here we see the weapon changes, but the same issue really happens. Actually, I should probably talk about this moment. Is he actually to get a good retake off? Okay, yeah, I'm actually gonna talk about this game more. Again, it feels like Good Morning is really just sitting back and giving up mid for free. Ogaya pushes in, but you can see, in contrast to what Omega was doing and pushing in hard and his teammates just not coming with him, Ogaya is like pushing in, but he's not coming too hard to it until his teammate actually comes in to assist. Or like he pushes in on stack, he's alone on stack, but he doesn't commit hard to it, and then like Crops and Ellis come in to like play off of what Ogaya was doing. And And then he goes over to do this, and then you've got like Red Rum coming over to assist with Omega. So Omega is basically doing the same thing Omega should be doing, or Omega is doing. It's just, in the case of Rose, his team's actually playing off of him. Whereas with Omega, I really feel like the team just isn't really doing much off of what Omega's doing. And then here we have like an awkward moment. It feels like there's a lack of communication, possibly. So you do actually have Keen coming over to help with that fight, which is good. But then Lux like stays over for a very long time. And this isn't really a spot where Explosion wants to be for an extended period of time. So it's like he comes over to help with the fight, and they just like stays there for longer than he needs to. And it looks like he's trying to find out if that person's still there. Like there wasn't good enough communication to say that that area is clear. I don't know. It's hard to say for sure, but it did feel like Lux was staying in that area for a little bit too long. And the one thing I will say is that it does feel like Soldier and Keen are playing off each other well. It's just they need to be playing off of Omega more. And here the push kind of falls apart. But Omega actually pushes out here, which is a really good play. It's a play that doesn't really work out, so he jumps out, but like going over here when you're starting to lose control forces the other team to like split their attention. It makes it easier for the rest of your team to actually do something off of that. But when he realized the rest of his team wasn't doing anything off of that, he jumped out. It's like Soldier jumped out, Omega jumped out, Lux backed out. If the rest of the team was actually in position to do something off of that, that would have been a really good play. And we've just kind of waiting for an opening to push in. Tends to be what happens in zones. And King gets picked early, which is not good. So that just completely stops the push early. Getting picked early on zones is really bad. Yeah, I'm not really sure what Keen was doing when he got picked. I want to see. Is this where it was, right? Oh, he pokes out to throw a bomb, and then the bamboo starts shooting, and then he comes back to throw another bomb. Like, once the bamboo starts shooting that area, he should have been out. You can't take that kind of risk when you are, like, not even pushing in yet. Is that really stalled their push? If they pushed in before that... What was that, here? Yeah, because he had armor. He had armor, he threw the bomb, they had 4 specials. If they pushed in now, they could have stopped at like 40. Maybe. But then he gets picked, and that just completely stalls the push. To be honest, they probably still could have pushed in because they have 3 specials, and the other team has none, but they do wait for King to come back, and then they do their whole push in. They do 2 armors and they do the armor and the bomb rush to like start the push. They use the bubbles and the baller to continue the push, which is good. It doesn't work out, but it's good. The main issue isn't the special uses there, it's the player positioning, I think. So Omega's like their main playmaker, but he's using bomb rush. And then Keen's kind of like rushing in alone. So I think the main issue with this retake, they do a really good job using specials well for the retake, but the positioning of the players is kind of awkward. And I'm thinking maybe they don't actually want Omega to be doing the bomb rush for like an entry special. It's probably actually better for Omega to be like pushing in first and then using the bomb rush to continue the push and having somebody else do like another special to help push in. So I'm not sure what else they would do. Like they could use bubbles to like try to get in, but that's also not ideal. Honestly, what might work better is Omega on like K-Shot and using missiles before they push in, so he can actually push in with his main weapon instead of being sucked back. Where was it? Because here again, they're using the armor in the bomb rush to get in, and then they're using the bubbles in the baller to continue the push and take zone and like take control completely. But the issue is that Omega using bomb rush sticks them back here, and like I said, he's the main playmaker for the team. He doesn't want to be back here. Whereas if he pop missiles, they could use the armor and the missiles to get a chance to push in, and then use the bubbles in the baller to continue the push. But then Omega could actually like be up here when the missiles are landing rather than be way back here while the bomb rush is going off. Because that's the one thing I don't think Neo Splash is very good at. I don't think it's good for like that specific situation. Because normally Neo Splash is a pretty well-rounded weapon, especially on zones. But if you're specifically the first one going in on zones and you want a special to use as you're pushing in rather than to like continue the push, which usually I think if you're using Neo Splash, you're either going to be like the second one in, or if you're the first one in, you're probably going to use the bomb rush not to start the push, but rather continue the push, in which case it works a lot better. But if you're trying to use the bomb rush to start the push and you're usually the first one into fights, it really messes with your team dynamic, and the rest of your team doesn't really have anything to play off of. Especially when your team has a junior, an X-Flow, and a squeezer, because none of them really want to be the first one in. Junior can kind of be the first one in. X-Flow can kind of be the first one in as long as it ballers, but even then, that's not really ideal. They really want Omega to be the first one into fights, and he's not doing that when he's using Bomb Rush. And again, I'm not really talking much about Rose, but I think Rose is just generally doing a good job, and it's hard to really say much about them because this set mostly just feels like Good Morning making mistakes, not Rose like doing anything particularly amazing. It's just Rose playing well, Good Morning making mistakes. Yeah, I actually think K50 was better fit for Omega's playstyle than Neo Splash was. Because K50 really gives you a lot of tools to keep you alive once you get in, and that's what Omega wants to be doing. Again, we have the issue where Omega's pushing in and Soldier and Keen are just kind of like sitting back. They really need to coordinate that, where Omega pushes in and then Soldier and Keen push in with him to actually like help him out and get picks off of him. But again, I feel like Omega is actually doing the right thing in those kinds of situations. Yeah, Soldier waits for armor. I think he could have pushed in a little bit earlier and like used armor in the middle of the fight or something. But mostly it's just like Keen was still out of respawn, so whatever. And here we have Omega, like, it looks like he's about to make a play, and then he, like, changes his mind. Which in this case is actually a good thing, because Keen and Soldier weren't there to, like, play off of him. But if his team actually played off of him, Omega pushing in here would actually be good. So if you look at what happens before that, they get 2 down, they see a jump out, there's only one person in this part of the map. I tried using my finger on the screen. I forgot I need my mouse. Okay, there's only one person in this part of the map, and they know that because there's 2 people down and they saw a jump out. If Omega pushes here and Keen pushes here, they get control of this part of the map pretty much for free. But they don't do that. Omega like pushes in a little bit and then backs out. Keen's using missiles, which also means they know exactly where people are. Which honestly, I don't think that was the best missile because, like I said, they should know that there's only one person in this part of the map already. And they might not know exactly where he is, but they should be capitalizing that rather than waiting for the other team to respawn and then using missiles. Because if they did what I said, they would have control of this part of the map already, and they would be getting the tower like at least to this checkpoint. I don't know how visible my mouse is on the video, but yeah. But because they played it so safe, they just didn't get anything. And yeah, it does actually feel like Soldier and Keen are playing off each other well. If you say here, like, Soldier is taking fight, but he's not committing too hard to it, and Keen sees and he comes over to help. And then Soldier jumps out, Keen gets out. So it feels like those two are playing off each other well. It's just they need to also play off Omega. Yeah, I'm just kind of waiting to see what happens at this point. I'm actually surprised if I had dropped down from here, because controlling that position can be really strong for taking pushes. I'm not really sure why he backed out. It looked like he was trying to help out with a fight, but there wasn't actually a fight going on. But again, overall, it just feels like Rose is playing better together as a team, whereas Good Morning is having some issues with playing off Omega. They do finish, like, end the push, but it's, like, way too late to really matter. Oh, and that's really bad. Keen does exactly what he's supposed to do there. He gets out, stays like in a fairly relevant part of the map while still like maintaining that he's safe, like making sure he's safe. Soldier's just kind of like taking 1v1 over there, which is kind of weird. I'm guessing he just didn't realize Crofts was going to push in on him. So that's kind of fine. It'd be nice if like Lux came over and like crossfired over here or something, but ultimately it's fine. Because the main thing is that these three are taking a fight over here. You know, Ovaya does a really good job like keeping himself alive. Hard to say much because all I have is the top down, so I can't say much if I was an individual play there, but like he's taking a 1v3 basically with some crossfire from Red Realm. And that turns into 1v4. Well, I mean 1v3, but Keen dies. Yeah, the team actually like coordinates pretty well on defense, but it's also easier to coordinate on defense and tower control compared to offense. Offense is generally the hardest part of tower control. We see Omega again, like actually making a good play. He doesn't commit too hard, which is not only partly just this map design. It's hard to like overcommit on this map. So if you go like too far in here, you're just dead. Even if you have teammates with you. But watching here, like you see Omega pushing in, but like the rest of the team is actually like fairly close to him. You see Soldier here. Keen's actually over here. Lux is pushing in. Omega pushes in, but Lux is actually over here to help him out. And Lux being in this spot is really good. Because Lux is, at the ball point, is going to be really focused on like area control. And once you get him into like an area like this, he's going to be really hold this part of the map really well. And like Omega's sticking close enough to tower that King can help him out from tower. Soldier's taking a bit long to get in, which is a bit weird. I feel like Soldier should be like pushing quicker rather than like going over here and just kind of like stalling. Be Soldier helping out in the fight over here, I think would make a huge difference. He feels really irrelevant over here. But once he does push in, they're able to keep the push going. And again, like that's the one moment in the game where it really feels like the team actually comes together and they win. So I do really think that if the team actually finds a way to work together and it stops feeling so split where like Omega runs out on his own, the rest of the team is like off in irrelevant parts of the map. If they can like fix that issue, it really feels like Good Morning could have beat Rose in this set. They just kept having that issue. And again, it's the same issue as before, where on Rainmaker, where they go in, they get pop, and then they just run away. Lux is just like off in the middle of nowhere farming for Inkjet. I think they're all like farming for special, and then none of them actually get special by the time Rose gets an opening and like takes control of mid and gets a push going. They're literally going for pop and then like completely making the fact they got pop irrelevant. There's literally no point getting pop if you're just going to run away and get specials afterwards. But the fact that they're not even contesting mid and going for specials instead is guaranteeing that Rose gets a free push at the beginning of the match every single time. And it's entirely possible that Rose can get a winning push off of this. Like, especially in Rainmaker, giving the other team a free push at the very beginning of the game, when you haven't had time to, like, get specials, and you haven't had time to, like, establish any map control of your own. Like, that's a very dangerous situation to be in. And Rose very much could have won off of that. Openings are very important, and they're very important on Rainmaker. That's actually an issue I see with other teams as well, especially with armor weapons. A lot of time you'll see the armor weapon kind of like sitting in base farming armor in the opening, and they have only 3 people in mid. And assuming the other team isn't also doing the exact same thing, a lot of time you'll see the other team of 4 just like push into mid and take free control. I actually saw this a lot with, was it Riptide, I think? I think it was Riptide where FT1 lost to Starburst. And a big part of that was that Starburst got a free push in the opening for pretty much every single map and mode. Like, no matter what map and mode, Starburst had a free advantage in the opening, because they would always have somebody just like sitting back farming for special at the opening. FT1 did. And FT1 would often like come back from a disadvantage and still win in some of the games. But every single game, it felt like they're starting at a disadvantage, and it wasn't, or like it was very much because of a choice they made, not because Starburst had some kind of like really good play they made. So you really need to actually contest mid and start the match, because otherwise you literally just give up an early lead, or give the other team an early lead. And again, Omega's going in, making an actual good play. It's just like, where are Soldier and Keen? Well, I'd say it's a good play. Ultimately, I think what Omega should have been doing is like maybe helping out this area with like Ovaya and Ellis while these guys push in. But even then, like, Soldier and Keen are really far back. So they stop the Rainmaker. They don't actually gain control of the mid again. Keen actually wins a fight here, which is really good. Yeah, these aren't bad players. Keen's able to actually like win a fight over here, even though it's a bad situation for him. It really is just these two need to focus on working off Omega. And maybe Omega could focus more on like taking fights closer to those two rather than going off here. I feel like I should make my cursor like 3 times as big to make it easier to see. Yeah, Ovea is kind of like cut off here. This is the one moment where I think it stops being about Good Morning making mistakes, losing them the game, and more about like Rose actually making a major mistake here. Because Good Morning wins the fight in mid. Do a good job here. Ovea goes back here to go for like a flank or something, which this could be a good play on any other mode, but specifically on Rainmaker, the objective just moves too fast. And this is a horrible place for him to be in, especially since they only have one other person up. So he really doesn't want to be here, but he stays here. He does eventually jump back, but he's like sticks around for a little bit. Meanwhile, the other Good Morning is able to just like push it all the way to here. And Lux actually stays back to deal with Ovea, which is unnecessary. Like, Lux could have literally just ignored him. He's irrelevant there. Again, any other mode, he would actually be an issue, but specifically on Rainmaker, that was horrible. But even with that, like, really clear advantage, they don't get a winning push off of it. So Omega goes down. Soldier's too far back to play off Omega. Which Soldier, it's because he's respawning. But really, Lux needs to be there to help out. And Lux, like, trying to deal with Ovea instead of pushing up here to help with the push is actually what killed the push, I think. It's like I said, on Rainmaker, Ovea is irrelevant there. They could just ignore him. And Lux was really needed up here to keep the push going. Because as long as they dealt with crops, they could have easily gotten a winning push off of this. But because they didn't have anybody to help Omega take that fight, they could have still won with Omega winning the fight, but there's no... It's much easier to guarantee that win when you actually have somebody else to fight with Omega and play off the hammer. And here again, I feel like Omega's doing exactly what he should be, and Keen and Soldier aren't playing off of him. Where, like, he's over here, like, Crops is over here, they see Crops, Omega goes for Crops, the other three are just, like, in mid. They could come over here and help with the fight, but they just kind of, like, stay back in mid, Keen missiles, Soldier picks up. And they do get another push off it, but they don't get any, like, too strong of an advantage. At this point, the push is kind of dead, but they have a chance to maybe keep it going. But they just don't really. Like, this is pretty much just a fight. It comes down to, like, individual player skill. There's not, like, a major strategic thing going on here. It's not like one team is doing better strategically. That literally does just come down to fights in the moment-to-moment gameplay. Yeah, not much to say about here. Both teams doing a decent job pushing and defending. I feel like I should be talking, but there's not really anything to say. I guess I'll skip around. Oh, here I think was actually an issue. Yeah. This was a huge issue, actually. It's just like the other match. They get 2 down, and 1 jumps out. So now they know for sure there's only 1 person on the map. They might not know exactly where he is, but they know there's only 1 person in the relevant part of the map. They want to pick up Rainmaker and push immediately, pretty much. And they wait a little bit too long to do it. Probably because they're waiting for Lux to get back in. And then on top of that, Omega's over here. Like I said, Omega's the playmaker. They need to play off Omega. The way this team comp works, like Omega is the one making the plays and the rest of the team needs to like follow him. Omega's up here using Hammer. They have a path over here. And the entire rest of the team just ignores him and goes to the right. And King just gets dropped on. If they went left, they'd actually have a push. Like, they easily could have actually played off Omega and potentially gotten a push off here. But instead, they just, like, ignore Omega and just kind of, like, run off on their own. And that's a fitting end for a set where the main issue was Omega making good plays and the rest of the team not really working off of it right. So I'm just going to be doing a 1 match out of this set because after the first game they switched to the auto spec instead of the overhead. But I will be talking a bit about the FT Win versus Jackpot sets after this. It's just I won't be able to do the overhead stuff. It'll be more talking about like comp differences and how their comps and comp changes affect the gameplay. But this is actually a really good game to look at. So it really highlights how to play tower control. With one team being a very clear advantage example of tower control pushes done poorly, and one team being a really good example of tower control pushes done well. Well, I will say I'm not a fan of Q picking E-leader. I think Q should have been Firefin. I think Firefin, in general, I think Firefin's just better than E-leader, but specifically for the way Q plays the game, I think it's a better fit for her. But here we get the first example of a push. So Friends has an opening to push. They get a pick. They get the Inkjet. And this Inkjet might seem good at first, but there's actually an issue with this Inkjet. I'll talk about it in a minute. Because the thing is, they're using an Inkjet to start the push, and they get the push going. Like, they're using an Inkjet to start the push, and they're able to start the push going. But the issue with this comp is they don't really have any good ways to continue the push. And in particular, they don't have good ways of dealing with like this area of the map. Which you really need ways to deal with this part of the map. And for Friends, their best way of dealing with this part of the map is the Inkjet. Which they already used to start the push. So they're not going to have an Inkjet to deal with this part of the map to continue the push. And if they don't have any way to deal with this part of the map, they're going to have a really hard time pushing past like this checkpoint. And just in general, they have an armor to continue the push. That's about it. And then they have missiles. But again, they don't really have a way to deal with this part of the map, and Q goes up here. You see Q go up there, you see Leafy up there, and they have no way to deal with this. And because they have no way to deal with that very strong defensive position, and no way to like continue the push going here, like no like strong special continue the push, the push just kind of dies. And the Knot is actually getting close to Inkjet again. So if they like backed out a little bit and then got Inkjet and then pushed in again, maybe they could have done it, but at that point they had already given Jackpot time to take control of this area. And what they really needed was a way to deny this area before Q and Leafy got there. Like right now, they needed an inkjet there. And they just don't have a good way of dealing with this part of the map. And you don't need inkjet to do that. Actually, Blob can do a good job of dealing with that part of the map, but the Blob's on tower, so it's not really close enough to do that. If you have like a K machine, that's pretty good at dealing with that part of the map. Stingray can do that job. In tower control, Stingray actually works surprisingly similar to inkjet. We can use it to deal with those hard to reach parts of the map that the enemy team uses to defend. But again, the main issue is that they didn't really have any way to deal with this part of the map. They didn't have any strong ways to continue the push once they got started. All they really had was the armor and missiles. But they didn't have any way to like deal with the hard parts of the map, the strong defensive parts of the map. And the main difference in this game is that Jackpot actually does do a good job of like continuing their push and having a way to like keep the push going once they got to the same part of the push that Friends' push fell apart on. See, they got the push going, but this Friends takes control of that strong part of the map I was talking about. And instead of committing hard to it, Jackpot kind of like backs out and like plays it safe. And Friends actually gives up that position to go over and like try to finish off the push and like get the kills rather than staying in the defense positions. But here, like, they get the push going. They got armor to like keep the push up here. Leafy's going in, taking the fight. They've got Legend like shooting up at the Blob. And Q's also shooting up at the Blob. And then they have Inkjet to like continue the push. It still falls apart, but they're doing the right thing. It's like execution is kind of falling apart, but from a strategy perspective, they know what they're doing. And they're also doing a really good job keeping control of mid, so they can get more pushes off. But in here, they get a good push going. They get an advantage. And the important part is that as soon as the Blob gets to the spot, they have armor inkjet. So the other team can't use this area to defend like Jackpot was able to do. And they have a strong way to deal with people in this part of the map with the armor inkjet. And once they get that, you see like they're at the same point, points-wise, as where Friends' push fell apart. But because they have the armor inkjet right when they need it, their push goes through. While Friends' push like fell apart at that exact part of the map. And it's all because they had a strong way of dealing with this strong position at the moment when they needed it. Whereas Friends blew their inkjet early and didn't have a good way of dealing with that part of the map once they got there. And they're easily able to snowball the push because they actually like had specials. They had the specials they needed when they needed them. And you see Kepler just kind of like taking tower, winning fights. At this point, it's mostly just like more individual plays. It's hard to really say so much from overhead here, but the big thing that decided this game really was this part of the map. And the fact that Friends didn't have a strong way of dealing with this part of the map, Jackpot did. So Jackpot got past, and they got a winning push. And that's really how tower control works. You need good ways to consistently get past these strong defensive positions. And once you do that, you're pretty much just like set to push to like a winning score. Maybe not like a KO, but as long as you get past those strong positions, you're pretty well set. And like I said, after this game, they switched to spectator cam. or auto spec. So I'm going to skip ahead to FT Win. Okay, so the main issues I'm going to be talking about with this set is actually going to be more on comp side, especially since it's Spectator Cam. I can't really say much about the general strategy of the two teams when it's auto spec. It's way harder to tell what's going on in a broader sense when you're not overhead. But the main issue that's going to be coming up is that FT1 has a really good comp with, like, it's really adaptable, whereas Jackpot has both the Charger and the Knot, which both want a buffer. I'll be talking more about buffer in a minute. But both these weapons want some kind of buffer, and they're just not getting enough buffer from Legend Xe, especially when Xe picks Junior, which he will be a lot. So the main issue is that these two weapons want some kind of buffer. They want, in a buffer, I mean, they want players ahead of them to play off of. Because Charger doesn't want to take close range fights, you probably already know that. So Charger wants people in front of it so it can, like, play it safe and stay at, like, a optimal distance. Whereas Knot wants a buffer, not because it needs to stay at optimal distance, because it can take close range fights, but rather because the fact that it has to charge before it takes fights means that it wants to pick its fights. It doesn't want to be, like, the first one into a fight, or even the second one in a lot of the time. Mostly it doesn't want to be the first one into a fight. It wants to be the second one in. It wants to go in, get a pick, and then get out. Or go in, get a pick, get another pick, get out. It really wants to be able to pick its fights, and we don't have a good buffer with a variety of, like, weapons ahead of you to provide that buffer. You can't pick your fights the same way you want to. And most of the set really comes down to how well the rest of the team allows Leafy to do what she wants to do. And most of the time, it doesn't seem like the team is giving Leafy what she needs to actually, like, play the weapon well. And I saw Leafy complaining on Twitter about not feeling terrible after this set. And this is the main reason. Like, Not really wants a buffer. If they actually, like, did a good job giving Leafy that buffer, this comp would work way better. Now, I'll talk about more later, because they actually do adapt the comp in a way that I think works a lot better for Leafy later on. But early on, a lot of the issue feels like Q and Leafy both want a buffer, and they're just not getting it. Meanwhile, on FT1's side, Rapid Pro also wants that buffer. It wants to be fighting at max range. It wants to be... Yeah, like, it doesn't want people rushing it down, just like with Charger. But in FT1's case, all three of these weapons do a good job buffering it. All three of these weapons are taking fights ahead of it. So Kyo can pretty much just do whatever he wants. He doesn't have to worry about being rushed down all the time. He just gets to do whatever he wants. Whereas Q and Leafy have to take a lot of situations that aren't going to be in their favor. It's to be awkward for the weapon. Especially with Xe Junior. Xe Zap gives them two weapons that actually buffer them. But when Xe picks Junior, he kind of, like, stays back a lot more, plays it a lot safer. And it really gives issues for their team, because it's pretty much just Legend pushing alone, and then, like, Leafy Q have to, like, do something off of it, but the weapons don't really want to be pushing into situations they're in. And I will say this comp is playable. It's not like they're inherently going to lose with this comp. It's more that the comp they have makes it harder to win. They have to play much better with this comp than they would if they had a comp that was easier to work with. And against a team like FT Win that's, like, consistently playing well, they're really going to struggle. And another factor is Rapid Pro, actually. Because Rapid Pro is particularly good at dealing with Jackpot. Because, like I said, Jackpot has issues where, like, these two weapons potentially want a buffer. But the thing is, they can handle that a lot better when they're playing with squad shooter. Because Not doesn't care as much about buffers when it's constantly taking fights in its advantage, which it's going to be doing against quad shooter comps. Or like if the team has like a 3-shooter and a try, or 3 shooters and a CDS or something like that. As long as Not is fighting weapons it wants to fight, it doesn't really need a buffer. It's just specifically against a comp that actually takes advantage of Not's weaknesses, it really wants that buffer. And FT1 more than any other team they faced provides that issue, because having the wall and the booyah bomb makes 52 more survivable. It makes it harder for the Not to just come in and like insta-kill the 52. And on top of that, Rapid Pro is really good at dealing with both Flatlings and Chargers, including Not. Because Flatlings and Chargers don't have very good ways of consistently getting away from blasters. So once the blaster starts shooting at them, if they're not in if they don't already have a really good escape route, they're pretty much just stuck and they're dead. So if Not is constantly taking fights where it doesn't have a strong buffer, and it's like constantly being put in situations where it needs to take fights that aren't in a clear advantage for it, it's going to constantly being stuck in positions where it's going to be just murdered by the Rapid Pro. So it's partly the issues with Jackpot's comp, it's partly the fact that FT1's comp is especially good at dealing with the issues of Jackpot's comp. And Not on its own isn't an issue against Rapid Pro, it's just, like I said, Not needs a buffer to allow it to pick the fights it wants to take, rather than being forced into taking fights it doesn't want to take, which is what's happening. So with the comp they have, the Not's going to be forced to take fights it doesn't want to take. It's not going to be able to survive those fights because of the Rapid Pro and the K52. And I wish I could like give good examples of this happening, but without the overhead, it's hard to do that. It's just very hard to see how games are playing out from like individual player views. One thing I will say is that I wish Bagel went mini here, like for all the earlier maps. Because Bagel's really good on mini, and I think mini would be a better fit for this FT1 comp than Zap. I was thinking maybe they're picking Zap because that's the comp they would be running with FT1 normally, since normally they would have Bursty or Toon playing Zap. So I was initially thinking they just wanted to play their normal comp, and they were having Bagel play Zap, even though it wasn't the best pick for him individually. Actually, I'm going to get back to this in a minute. But initially I thought they were talking about, or they're having Bagel play Zap because that's what they would normally have on the team. But then later in the tournament, Bagel actually picks like Blob and Mini, the weapons that he actually plays that are unique to the weapons that Bursty and Toon would be playing. So Bagel is still picking his more unique weapons. It's just he's mostly picking Zap anyways. And so the reason I think Mini would be a better fit for them, especially on zones. The other modes I think Zap might still be better. But for zones in particular, besides the fact that Bagel's just good at Mini, and I like seeing Mini, but they already have an armor, which, I mean, double armor is fine. It's just, if you don't have a specific reason to double armor, it's just like, there's not really much of a reason to do it. It's just kind of fine. Meanwhile, the main issue with Mini is that it doesn't have a lethal bomb. It has no way of doing like consistent indirect damage. And that's an issue you see with a lot of the current meta, actually. We have like K52 and Neo Splash a lot, neither of which has a lethal bomb. So you see these comps where it's like K52, Neo Splash, Zap, and then like V-Jet. They have one lethal bomb, and outside of that, they have no way of dealing indirect damage, and that is actually like a weakness of the team. It's not the biggest weakness in the world, but it's like it is actually a weakness that the team has. They have no way of dealing with people like hiding behind walls. They have no way of dealing like like I was talking about tower control, they don't have good ways of dealing with those strong defensive positions if they don't have good indirect damage or like specials to deal with that area. And the thing Rapid Pro does really well is it's basically a bomb as a main weapon. And you can actually say the same thing about like Blob and Explosher. But like Rapid Pro does indirect damage from a safe distance as a main weapon. So you can run Rapid Pro and then run like a Mini and a K52 and you're not really going to have that big of an issue from not having bombs because you have that consistent, safe, indirect damage from the Rapid Pro. So you don't need bombs as much. And the Rapid Pro can basically play the role of bombs in that comp and give you that free indirect damage. So I don't think the bomb's as important in its comp because they have the Rapid Pro, and I don't think the armor is as important because they already have the armor from the Rapid Pro. And on top of that, I think Bagel's just good at Mini, and having him on Mini would be an asset. Like I said, he does actually play Mini like the last game of the set, I think. Well, the last game of Grand Finals. This isn't Grand Finals yet. But I really wish Bagel actually played Mini more in this set because I think it would be a better fit for the team and a better fit for him as an individual player. So I said I was going to get back to this moment. This was actually a really good play from Leafy. Like I said, you can't really see too much from individual cam, but this was like... Leafy sees the Rapid Pro there. And Rapid Pro is really good at dealing with inkjets too. I didn't mention that earlier, but on top of dealing with the main weapon, Rapid Pro is also really good at dealing with the inkjets with his indirect damage. But yeah, Leafy sees the Rapid Pro and then goes for an inkjet and then doesn't actually have good inkjet shots. Because she's too worried about not giving the Rapid Pro a free kill. And so Leafy uses an inkjet, gets absolutely nothing out of it except dying on landing. So that's like that might actually be the only individual play I actually looked at because there's not really much for me to talk about without overhead. But that was a really awkward play. So like I've been saying, the main issue I'm noticing is Jackpot wants a buffer for their not in Charger, especially against a Rapid Pro, which does well against both the not and the Charger. And FT Win has that buffer. I do want to make it clear that I don't think making your comp more well-rounded on its own is always a good thing. There's always like a balance of getting well-rounded weapons and also having more specialized weapons and taking advantage of that. I do actually think FT Win picking 3 shooters that can act as a buffer and be more like adaptable, and also picking a Rapid Pro that needs that buffer but has like unique strengths, like I think that's worth doing. I think that is actually a better comp than running like a V-Jet instead of the Rapid Pro, even though the V-Jet is more well-rounded. And I think that's an issue that the current meta has a lot, where they're picking a lot of these really well-rounded comps, but because of that, they don't really have any strengths. They don't have any strengths to take advantage of. They just have a bunch of stuff that's really well-rounded. It can adapt to any situation, but they don't have any good situations to be in. They don't have any like strengths to make the most out of. They just have weapons that can adapt. I think it's good to find a balance between having a comp that can adapt to any situation while still having strong, like unique strengths to your comp that you can make the most out of, like a Rapid Pro or not. Again, I think the Knot is actually a really good pick for the Jackpot. I just think that the rest of the comp needs to work better around it. And I've already been saying this, but I think later on their comp actually does that better. Okay, I'm going to skip around at this point because I've already given my main thoughts. Okay, before I get into Grand Finals, I do want to say, I kind of pointed this out earlier, but Xyz's been going Zap this entire Winners Finals set. And that's important because, like I said, these 2 weapons want a buffer. And with both the Neo Splash and the Zap, they get 2 weapons to buffer for them. FT1 has 3 weapons to buffer for the Rapid Pro, which is better, but like having 2 weapons to buffer does make it easier for Leafy and Q to take strong fights. And that's important because XE actually goes junior in grand finals. I think that's a big issue in grand finals. Whereas in here with XE on Zap, it's a lot easier for the comp to work. In some of the outcome of these matches really just does come down to individual plays and stuff like that, and like execution. It's just I'm focusing on the broader side of things. Okay, so here we are in grand finals. We got Q on Bamboo, which I think is good. Bamboo also kind of wants a buffer, but it's easier to work with than Charger is. And so the Knot and the Bamboo still both want a buffer, but they function better without one than the Spider Scope does. But XE's on Junior. And XE on Junior is often not going to be taking fights. Which basically means they have a Bamboo which handles their comp a bit better. But then they also have the Junior, which means that the only one actually pushing in ahead of the Knot and the Bamboo is going to be the Neo Splash. And that's going to be really awkward for them. Especially if the Junior takes tower, which I believe the Junior does take tower. Yeah, XE on tower. You have like a Neo Splash pushing on its own, and then you've got like a Bamboo and a Knot trying to play off of the Neo Splash. But if the Neo Splash goes down, they have no buffer anymore. And even with the Neo Splash up, they don't have much of a buffer. And it's just going to be really awkward for the Knot, because the Knot's going to be forced into taking a lot of fights it doesn't want to take. Same with the Bamboo. Yeah, meanwhile, FT Win actually has Kyo on the tower as the Rapid Pro, which is really good because like the other three weapons can really like take fights easily. Rapid Pro can like crossfire on them, give them like shots to work with. They have three weapons that kind of like push up and don't really need anything. They can just like take fights on their own. And then like the Rapid Pro is the one that really needs something ahead of it to want to take fights. And it's staying on tower, so it's like the Rapid Pro is always going to have somebody helping it with fights because the tower is going to be behind the rest of the players. And even when Kyo is not the one on tower, he's still going to be like playing behind two people with like Zap on tower or whatever. And here you see Leafy just like dropping in on a Rapid Pro and immediately dying. And that's the issue with not having a buffer. There's a good example. Leafy wants somebody else to push in ahead of her. Here. Yeah, I saw more situations like that throughout the tournament. I'm just going to be skipping around because there's a lot of stuff not to talk about. But in this situation, if you have the Neo Splash pushing in here, and then the Knot playing off the Neo Splash, they can win this fight. But the Knot just dropping in on a Rapid Pro is just going to die. This is just a bad situation to be in. Which is partly just Leafy dropping in a bad fight. That's like even... Well, like the other two players are dead. Like that's never going to be a good situation to be in. But if Leafy did wait a little bit longer, and if like they did actually have weapons there to help out, Leafy could have actually like won that fight. Leafy needed somebody there with her. And that's the issue I'm getting at. And there are a lot of moments that felt like that, where Leafy's kind of like charging in on her own and needs somebody else with her. And with their comp, she's just not getting people with her. So I'm going to skip to the next game. I'm going to start talking about like comp changes, because this is where like they actually start changing the comps around. Yeah, here we're actually back to the Charger, but then we also have the Junior, which is like probably the worst iteration of this comp I've seen so far. Because, like I said earlier, Firefin's going to have an even harder time without that buffer than Bamboo does. And even Bamboo on that buffer, and Junior's not going to be providing that. So on Junior, XE's not really taking fights. With Zap, they actually had two weapons providing that buffer. But with Junior, they've got literally just the Splash. And this is not going to be a good game for them. Which it is actually still a match. Like, there's still Jackpot's still actually doing pretty well here. It's just Jackpot has to play extremely well and not make mistakes for their comp to work. Whereas FT1's a lot more adaptable, and even if they have mistakes, or if the other team does things they have a hard time dealing with, they have a much easier time adapting. Whereas, like I said, Jackpot pretty much has to play perfectly to win this match. And they've been playing pretty close to perfectly so far. It's just... It's rough. And once they lose control, they kind of just don't have a good way of retaking, because they don't have a good way of playing off of the splash, and they don't have a really good way of like retaking control without having that buffer. So the Knot doesn't want to like rush in on zone. The Charger doesn't want to rush in on zone. The Junior's kind of staying back. Once they have control, they're going to do a good job, but this comp's going to struggle taking control. Because again, the splash is the only one that's going to be actually pushing in without like dying. They do actually retake zone here, but they had to like fight pretty hard to retake it. Like I've been saying, like Jackpot's actually doing a good job with the comp. It's just their comp does struggle. They're playing it really well, but it does struggle. And I think if Jackpot actually had a different comp, they would have won this game. And that is this match. This is the one thing where I think FT1's comp does actually have a little bit of an issue, because Kyo's on Rapid Pro is actually pretty slow. And here we actually see Jackpot switching over to a much easier comp to work with. They're back to the Zap, which will actually provide more of a buffer for the Knot. But on top of that, they also have Q on Jet, which Jet's not really going to be providing a buffer for the Knot, but also doesn't need one. It's much easier to work with. It's going to be playing back more, but doesn't really need a buffer to take fights. It can take close range fights if it needs to. It's just not going to be most of the time. So again, they have two weapons to buffer for Leafy, and Q doesn't need the buffer. So this comp is probably the best comp for Jackpot right now. And this is basically the comp they run for the rest of the tournament. And they do well with it. Them switching this comp is a big part of what allows Jackpot to actually do pretty well in this set. Whereas FT1 comp is still fine, it's still good, but this mode is definitely the comp where it's the weakest. Because it's less adaptable on Rainmaker because you don't have the bomb on the K52. And the Rapid Pro is slow, so it's not going to be able to like jump on things and kill things quickly. This is a bit of a slower comp. And it's still a good comp, but it's not as well suited specifically for Rainmaker compared to the other modes. So this map, you know, immediately see Jackpot switches a comp that's easier to work with and supports Leafy better. And FT1 still has the same comp, but the mode isn't as good of a fit for the comp. And we'll see how that goes in a minute. You can see here, like, both teams are actually contesting mid. I was talking about earlier how one team just kind of gave up mid control immediately and gave a free push immediately. In this case, both teams are actually contesting mid. It's just they still manage to get an advantage. It's interesting how I wish I had overhead to really talk about this more, but Jackpot's actually able to gain an advantage without getting a single kill. And I imagine that's through positioning. I just can't really say much on it because we don't have overhead. And that's good. I mean, that's basically what this comp should do. Leafy just like runs in and kills things. Like this comp should allow Leafy to do that more. You see, they actually have the splash with her. So even if Leafy didn't get those kills immediately, they would have the splash of brighter buffer so she doesn't immediately get killed as soon as the rest of the team turns around. But they don't need to, because they just get the picks and then immediately win. In this case, they get the wipe, so it's kind of like there's not really much after you win can do at this point. They wipe at a really crucial point. Without seeing the overhead, it's hard to say much. But I believe King Julian is Biscuit, but Biscuit could have backed up potentially and stalled a little bit, but it is not much you can do at that point. Here we've got basically the same comp with VJet instead of CJet. Now, normally I actually hate CJet or VJet. I don't think CJet's actually that great either, but like I genuinely don't think VJet is a good weapon. It can like sit back and farm missiles, and that's basically all it does. Like it can crossfire from a distance, but it's not very good at it because it's slow at. It doesn't have very good damage. It's a very slow killing weapon. It's not very good at painting. It paints pretty well from a raw number perspective, but if you actually look at the turf it puts down, it's very splotchy. And Jet basically puts down the kind of turfing that only gives you special and doesn't really do anything else for your team. It's not going to put down turf that's going to be useful to your team. It's literally just going to give you special and nothing else. And Toxic Mist is next to useless. So I honestly think if they picked like K-Shot and then ran like a sub-saver and special charge build and focused on like throwing bombs and painting specials, it would actually be better than picking the VJet. But all things together, despite the fact that I think Q is better on Firefin, and Firefin would be a better pick for Q specifically, in this team, I think this is a better pick. Though again, I think actually a K-Shot with like special charge and sub-saver would actually be even better for this kind of playstyle. And honestly, think about like any comp that runs VJet. Either you'd be better off picking a different ranged weapon like Ballpoint or Remix or like Squeezer or whatever. Or I think you'd be better off picking like K-Shot and just spamming bombs and missiles. I genuinely don't think this weapon's even worth picking. But it's fine, I guess, and again, like I said, it's easier to work with than Charger, and for this comp in specific, it's better than Charger. I just think there would be other options that'd be even better. There we see the only time Toxic Mist is ever useful. And even then, taking that fight with the Toxic Mist and the shooting, it's a very slow kill time. And if Kyo hit another shot, Kyo would have won that fight. The reason the VJet won that fight isn't because that Toxic Mist in the main weapon was that good. It's more just Kyo committed the fight and would have won if he hit one more shot. I think if that fight played again with the exact same situations, Kyo would have won. I don't think that was even a good situation for the Jet. It just kind of worked out. I don't think very highly of VJet. But again, I probably don't have much to say about this. It's more just, I think Jetbot adapt to a comp that works better for their playstyle. And FG1's comp is still good. It's just, without overhead, there's not really much to say about this. Yeah, they changed their comp, and then Jackpot wins 2 games in a row. Because they lost the FG win earlier. They were losing the rest of the set. They won 1 game, but lost the other 2. They changed to a comp that's where Q plays something easier to work with, and XZ plays something that's actually providing a buffer for Leafy not, and they suddenly start winning. And they get the bracket reset. Now here, I actually don't like the try here. I think the Try is a good pick for Kyo in general, and I think it's a good pick in this comp. It's just specifically on this map, I think the benefits of Rapid Pro are going to be more beneficial, especially against the Not. The Rapid Pro is really good against the Not for the reasons I talked about earlier. So I think sticking with a Rapid Pro would have been better in this situation. But Try is also fine. Try is easier to work with than Rapid Pro. It's more well-rounded, it's more adaptable. So ultimately the Try is fine. It's just this comp is good. I just think with how well Kyo was doing with Rapid Pro earlier and how well Rapid Pro deals with the Not, I think he should have stuck Rapid Pro for this map mode. But the Try is fine. And we do see XE back on Junior, which I don't like. And I will say, Junior actually can work as a buffer. It's just XE specifically not playing Junior as a buffer. And when he picks Zap, he does play it in a way where he's taking more fights and acting more as a buffer. With Junior, you generally don't really take fights with it. It's more you run up, you paint ahead of your team, and then like run around and use the mobility to stay alive. It's not like Junior pushes up and takes fights. It's that it uses its mobility to paint in a position where it's actually like being shot at. And if XE played Junior like that, it would work as a buffer for the Not, but he's not, from what I've seen. And Zap probably does actually work better anyways for that. It's just Junior can play like that, he just isn't playing it like that. Again, I wish I had overhead, but like the average person would rather see auto spectate, which is why it gets used. Yeah, it's a pretty close match, and honestly, I think if XE picked Zap instead of Junior, it could have been a big enough difference to get Jackpot to win the game. Because in a lot of situations, weapon picks aren't actually gonna make a big enough difference to change the outcome of a game. Most of the time, the biggest difference is skill level and execution and all this stuff. But specifically in this set and at like this top level, these teams are evenly matched enough that team comp will make a difference. Though like I said, in this case, it's less about the team comp and less about the fact that it's a Junior and more the fact that the way XE plays with the Junior is worse for the comp than the way XE plays with his app. And here, I really like this comp. Because Blob, just like Rapid Pro, is harder to work with. It doesn't really take disadvantageous situations very well. But it's very good at area control. It's very good at like assisting from a distance. It's good at like the indirect damage, like Rapid Pro, except it does indirect damage in a different way. And I do really like seeing the Blob in this comp, especially with Q on Try. Because just like the other three giving the Rapid Pro a buffer, these three give the Blob a buffer. Allowed the Blob to pretty much do whatever it wants, which is good for Blob. And then this team is back to the Zap, which I think is better. So this is going to be a game where it's like, without overhead, I can't really say anything about it. So I think both these comps are good. I think they're both good for the teams. It really, this game really comes down to how the team plays. Like individual plays, the general strategy, like execution, all that stuff. So I'm not really have much to say about this. It's just, I like the Blob. I think the Blob works well for the comp. I think it works well for Bagel. I think it works well for this map and mode. It does have a bit of the same issue that Rapid Pro had, where it's a bit slow. But the main issue is that it's less adaptable, and Rainmakers, where adaptable comps are the biggest thing, where it's the most important. But as long as you play it smart, it works. And that's the same case with their other comp. As long as they played it smart, they could have still done well with that comp. It's just, you really have to make sure you have a good defense, whereas a more adaptable comp would have an easier time adapting to defending. Whereas the less adaptable the comp is on Rainmaker, the more you're gonna have to like think about it and plan ahead for defense, which is just harder to do on Rainmaker than the other modes because of how fast the mode moves. Whereas on like tower control and zones where you know exactly where the objective is, you know exactly what it's going to be in 10 seconds, it's a lot easier playing ahead. Although Clan Blitz is kind of the same as Rainmaker, you want to be more adaptable. In Clan Blitz is a lot more faster doing pushes and defenses. It's pretty slow in mid, but doing pushes and defenses is kind of like Rainmaker, where it's harder to plan ahead for your defense, and more adaptable comps are usually better. Whereas zones and tower control, it's easier to run these kinds of things that are more situational and aren't as adaptable but have clear strengths. Yeah, that's actually where the issue comes into play. Like, once the blob goes down, they don't really have a good way of defending. They have one bomb. They really want the blob to defend on this map. Because the thing blob is best on Rainmaker is actually defense, which just kind of stalls Rainmaker forever. But without the blob, FD1 actually doesn't have a very good way of dealing with defense. And you see the blob at work. Even when it misses shots, it paints the area around there, and it does like chip damage to make it easier for teammates to kill the weapon and stuff. And it's just really good at like stalling. So that's the kind of moment where the blob actually is a bit of an issue, or this comp is actually an issue, because when the blob went down, they just didn't have a strong defense. Whereas I think Jackpot's comp is actually a little bit more adaptable. Because even if Not wants to be taking fights with a buffer, it does have a bomb when it doesn't have a good situation to be in. It can just like spam bombs until the rest of the team spawns. The Jet can use Ray to stall. It can use the main weapon burst bombs to stall from a distance. The Zap can stall with bombs. It's mostly just the splash on their side that's not going to be able to really stall Rainmaker on its own. Whereas with FT Win, they have like the Try and the K-52 aren't really going to be able to deal with Rainmaker on its own very well. They don't really have good ways to stall without lethal bombs or decent range. And here, Jackpot's actually in a pretty good position to defend. It's just, without overhead, it's hard to say much. Actually, this is kind of overhead, so I can talk about this. So we got Kiko pushing over to the left, which might not seem all that useful, but it's drawing attention over there. If they ignore him, he's just going to run in and kill them. And then you got the rest of the team pushing in. They're using Booyah Bomb. Booyah Bomb's really good on offense for Rainmaker, actually. Because it can eat up enemy bombs. It can eat up like bubbles if the enemy team has like bubbles or something else. But mostly bombs. It can eat up bombs and clear the path for the Rainmaker really well. Though Booyah Bomb's not very good on defense because it takes too long to come out. But they have a pretty good setup to push. It falls apart, but they have a good setup to push. It's just like Jackpot has a good defense setup, FG1 has a good push setup, both, and then they're able to like cheese a push. I'm honestly not even sure how that happened, but in general, both teams played this really well, and it was an extremely close game that could have gone either way in the last few seconds. These comps, I think, are the teams playing at their best. And you can really see how evenly matched they are in this match. And here we finally see Bagel and Mini. Which this, I think, is really the ideal comp for this team. I think the other one was a better comp for Rainmaker, but I think this is a better comp for this team. Or the ideal comp for this team. At least on zones. Clan Blitz, I don't think it's as good as it would be on zones for this comp. Or TC. But even then, like, Bagel's just good on mini. And I think Bagel's good enough on mini that even when in situations where this isn't necessarily the ideal comp, it's still going to be a good comp for them because Bagel's going to do a good job with the weapon, even if the weapon's less adaptable than Zap is. So again, from comps, I think these are like, this is like the two teams at their best, having like good solid comps that work well with their playstyles. And it just comes down to playing the game, but there's not much to say because no overhead. Yeah, this is actually kind of like that tower control match, where the other team wants to be able to deal with these strong defensive positions, potentially. It's not as big of a deal, but it's still, like, they need to deal with this area in order to continue the push. And they are able to, like, throw another power clam in and then die, which is still good. Like, but that's pretty much all they can really do without dealing with this part of the map up here. Because they pretty much score some quick points, and they don't have any way to really extend this push without having a strong way to deal with this part of the map. And so they would really benefit from having not necessarily like a weapon, because they already have the tools to do that. They can use Bomb Rush to deal with that area. They can use missiles. They can use bombs. They can use Inkjet. It's more they need to plan ahead and have a special ready to do that. Or like have weapons in place to deal with those areas. It's not a comp thing, it's a playstyle thing. And here you can see the knot shooting up in this area. And that's good. Like, you don't necessarily have to, like, get up in that area, you just have to, like, shoot in that area with the knot. And they do that. Or the knot in the jet. Actually, it might just be the jet. Yeah, you see Q shooting up that area. Easily if he's like jumping in with clams or going across the rail or whatever. But what they really need is for Q to keep shooting in that area. And she like stops paying attention to this area to like help over here, but as soon as she does that, Shaq can drop in, and that kills their push. So like I said, they need to keep this part of the map controlled. And as soon as they stop paying attention to it, they lose the push. And that's selling things like Jet Squelcher, Knot, Heavy, Hydra if you're going to run it, Charger if you're going to run it. You're like anchory, more area control focused weapons. That's what they're really good at. Once you take Basket, you can have those weapons kind of like deal with this part of the map. Well, the rest of your team like pushes in, scores, take fights, and then you've got like a Heavy standing right here, shooting up here, or you've got a Jet standing here, shooting up here. Though personally, I don't think you should actually pick Jet. But like Bamboo can do that, Knot can do that. Anything with decent range and decent kill threat, which is why I don't think Jet's very good. It's not the best of kill threats, but it can still do that. Or stuff like Machine or Blaster that can deal with these areas through like indirect damage rather than through range. And of course, F2Win has something that can do both of those. Rapid Pro both has the range to stand back and deal with those areas from a safe distance while also having indirect damage to do it without having to have a direct shot on them. So Rapid Pro might actually be the best option for dealing with these areas. And you can see Kyo doing that a little bit, and they scores. Yeah, honestly, Kyo would do better if he focused more on this area rather than bouncing around a bit more. But they still went off of this. Actually, is this a 100-to-1 push? I don't remember. It looks like it. And honestly, a big part of this issue is actually Jackpot. You can see Jackpot's kind of like rushing in on their own, dropping down. They're committing really hard to this fight, rather than taking these strong defensive positions, installing until they have some kind of advantage. And because of that, they're just going down one at a time until it's just Q left, and Q's not really going to be much of a threat, so he just keeps going. And then they respawn, but FT1 just kind of like pushes hard and pushes more clams in. Again, I think FT1 would do even better if Kyo was specifically focusing on this part of the map once the other team respawned. But of course, like, they do a really good job of this. And again, I think part of this was Jackpot messing up on the defense. Because Jackpot really needed to like group together, like create some kind of advantage and push in together here. Like right here, they have to do something. They can't just stall because the other team's going to win if they stall. Again, I wish I actually had full overhead for all of those sets, but I did what I could, and I talked about like team comps and everything. So that's going to be it for today. I'm thinking about doing another VOD review more focused on the individual play side of things, probably going over some of my old gameplay. Because honestly, for one, I think it's focusing on that side of the game is something I haven't really done that much. I've done a lot of focusing on the broader side of the game. And two, because that's also the side of the game I need to work most on as an individual. And going through and really like critically analyzing my own gameplay from more of like a individual plays perspective rather than the broader picture would be really helpful for me individually improving as a player in the future. Especially since I can't play the game right now and this is pretty much all I can do. So I look forward to that at some point. I've also got some other videos planned on coming, some about like Splat 3, some about Splat 2. So I'll see you in the next video.